We are live. Hello, Connor.
Hey, Chad. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, of course. Now, apart from both of us making things as awkward as possible, what are we going to talk about today?
So today we're talking about everybody's favorite topic, which is governance.
Governance.
And
you also
everybody
said
likes this.
Making a new socioeconomic system, right?
That's right. We're trying to build.
That sounds more interesting. It sounds loftier than governance.
That's
maybe
right.
more relevant to all of us.
So it's a coat of paint on top of the underlying question of governance. Yeah.
Okay.
Trying to build the obvious choice of governance for Mars, the socioeconomic system that everybody will choose once we get there.
For Mars. Okay, good.
For Mars eventually. For here in the meantime.
How long until we're on Mars trying to figure this out, you think?
Conditional on Elon being alive in a decade. Yeah, I don't know. We're always 20 years out, just like with AGI.
Okay,
and
good.
Fusion.
Good.
Yeah.
So sometime in the next couple of years. Okay, so why is this an interesting thing, particularly for like a tech audience? Why are you and I talking about governance?
Yeah. So I think that the first sense that we have is that we already live inside of a governance system and an economic system that has missing pieces, that's not working quite as well as we might hope. And I imagine that you could think of some governance problems that exist today.
Me.
Yeah. What do you come up with?
Well, I live in the United States and we have a two-party system, and almost nobody, including those in government, feel like they're getting things done that they want to get done because of the incentives, I guess, of the two-party system and the fact that you have to file into a set of beliefs on one side or the other.
Yeah. So it's slow, it's imprecise, it's ineffectual. This is a common complaint. Some people also view that as a feature. Obviously, they like that things don't change too quickly. So they would say it's actually beneficial that the laws aren't shifting too much under your feet. A good system is trying to find a balance between those two forces. But I'm thinking more like, what are some problems in the world that are a result of bad governance? So not just problems of the governance system, but a failure of governance to address large problems. And think broadly about not just governance, but like the socioeconomic system as a whole.
Okay. Well, an obvious one, which may not fit your criteria, would be like the opioid crisis in the United States. Maybe climate change.
Opioids great. Climate's great.
Hunger. Yeah. All the big issues that we've all cared about forever, right?
Yeah. All the ones that sit just outside the boundary of what we can address. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Those are great. Climate was the one that I was thinking would be a good object of discussion. I used to work in a climate company. I worked there for about a year, and we built something that was super valuable for people who were doing climate-related projects. And this company was called Digital Gaia, and it was not profitable either for them to do the things that were beneficial, nor for us to provide them with this service, right? Like the economics just didn't stack up. And so despite all of our intention to do something that was good, finding a way to make it sustainable and functional, and especially lucrative, right? It must be lucrative if we're going to try and raise money to build it. If it can't be lucrative, then it can't exist inside of the current game.
Right. Makes sense.
I have a sense that then that brings something up for you, which is like, does it sound lofty to say that we can address that?
Yes. It sounds borderline impossible, putting on my pessimist hat, which I rarely wear, but yeah, it does.
What makes it feel so impossible?
Because we have tried for so long. Incentives are very difficult. We are dealing with non-centralized decision making. So a given person with a good idea can't just sit down and wave a wand and decide how things are going to change. So we have to somehow coordinate with people with different worldviews, different understandings of the problem and possible solutions, and clearly different incentives.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So what I hear is we have a long history of failing at this. We getting people to align on shared incentives is difficult or impossible. Obviously, there's always going to be a Philip Morris that is making money, or a what's the name of the family that made all the money off the opioid crisis?
We should all remember it, but I don't. I know who you're talking about.
Opioid crisis company. Oh, it's Johnson & Johnson. Oh, okay.
Oh no, there's another one, but
it started with a P. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
There's always going to be an org that has this entirely misaligned incentive. Then there's the problem of systems changing sufficiently quickly, and then there's the problem of differing beliefs about the world. So, like, it's totally reasonable for someone to say, well, maybe actually opioids are beneficial, and to argue for it fairly convincingly. And so I am totally sensitive to the sense of like pessimism about our ability to address the problem. Obviously, I'm not pessimistic.
I hope not.
Otherwise, I don't think I could do this. Yeah. So that's the problem that we're gonna talk about for the next like hour or whatever. Is what I'm hoping that we'll do is we'll frame the problem of governance. The Sackler family was the answer. Yeah. We'll frame the problem of governance. Hopefully what we've already done is made it clear how it's relevant to the really big issues that we face. We'll then try and break it down into its component pieces. And we'll talk about some ideas that I have on how to address those component pieces. And then I think after that, we can talk about how we make this practical today. So not just talking about it at the big scale, but running experiments on the small scale, and maybe also how people can support if they want to get involved.
Great. And as a bit of foreshadowing that you might not even approve, I would like to say you're proposing a at least semi-technical or technological solution to this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, that's great. We should talk about the incentives or the assumptions that we're making about the world, which is that we are assuming only selfishness. We're not asking anyone to behave outside of their best interest. I'd even make the argument that it is unethical to try and do so. We don't want people to sacrifice themselves. We want people to act in ways that are sustainable for them and for the rest of the world, rest of the collective. And so an assumption of selfish incentive, an assumption of money continuing to want to get its way, which is, I think, where we will start this. And an assumption that people are trying to get their way in the system. There are certain things that people want, and they will continue to want those things. So we will continue to have adversarial actors. Mm-hmm. Not everybody will come to agree. And so that tells us about the governance system that we're trying to design, which is one that enables many people who have potentially conflicting preferences, sometimes extremely conflicting preferences, and who are operating in a highly financialized environment to nonetheless govern themselves more, address those problems that you talked about with existing governance systems, which is make them high velocity, make them responsive to new information, ensure that they aren't capturable, etc. So that's the goal.
You've generously given me credit for a much better answer than I gave earlier, but yeah, that's great.
Great. So I think the first place to start is with this problem of I'm curious what you think of the framing of why this is such a difficult problem, is that money has a tendency to get its way. That one of the constraints of the system, one of our design constraints, is that we live in a world where money is very persuasive. Of course, the job of money is to be persuasive. And it's possible to design, we just talked about some examples, to design systems that are very profitable and nonetheless that are net harmful. And so we talked about opioid crisis. Climate is another one. I think Philip Morris is my favorite example. 1950s, Philip Morris is lobbying US Congress in order to try and get them to, and the Department of Health, in order to try and argue to the courts that actually cigarettes are not harmful. Cigarettes do not cause cancer. And they have billions of dollars to throw at this problem in order to get their way. Whereas, by contrast, the group that's arguing that no, they actually are harmful are at a comparative economic disadvantage.
Makes sense. Also, guns don't kill people. People kill people.
Yeah, this one I find more difficult because the conversation is still ongoing. I find more difficult to say that we have our conclusive answer. I feel nervous to polarize myself by aligning with any particular dimension of the existing political landscape.
All right, I'll just polarize myself alone then.
Polarize yourself is fine.
Consider me polarized. Okay, so
I've owned and shot guns as well. I think it's very fun, and I've
same. So we kind of understand the problem. Where did you say you wanted to go from here?
Okay, so where I want to take us from here is we can think about one way to frame the problem that we're trying to solve is that there will be Philip Morrises of the world who find it very profitable to get a certain policy established in their favor, and they'll have lots of money in order to do that. And that this is sort of like, I like to call this the gravity or the G in the rocket equation. Big G in the rocket equation says that gravity has some force that's opposed to your rocket getting to space, and it's basically gravity that dictates everything about how big you have to make your rocket and so on. And there's sort of an equivalent quantity. And if you were a rocket scientist who is trying to ignore, big G when you're designing your rockets, your likelihood of success would be very low. I see a lot of people who design governance systems that try to avoid this, or they try to wave it away, or they try to say things like, it wouldn't be fair to allow money to influence the system. And they can say that, but if they say everybody's going to have a vote, and then it turns out that people, behind closed doors can bribe one another, then money is still influencing your system. It's just that you're closing your eyes to it. You're refusing to look at it. And so I think that this is a certain pragmatism is required in order to be successful.
Parenthetically, who are these people who are designing governance systems?
Yes, that's
that seems like a foreign idea. I never thought about designing governance systems as a career.
This is a good call out. What's kind of exciting about the era that we live in is that right now we are living through the Cambrian explosion of governance systems. There are these things called DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, that are groups of people that kind of are pooling their money on blockchains, on crypto rails, in order to make decisions collectively. And so the kinds of things that they will create are they'll create these mutualist collectives. They will create these investment vehicles where they'll be investing in various different companies, and they'll be using these. And for each of them, they'll kind of invent their own approach to how they're going to make decisions. And so there's some well-known ones that people can look up if they're interested. There's Moloch DAO, which has which allows you to pool your money, but then at any moment you can take your money out of the pot. You can leave the group. There is there's this thing called token voting, which is you buy the token of a organization of one of these DAOs, and then the more of the token that you hold, you can vote in order to get them to take certain actions. What else do we have that are common mechanisms? You have direct democracy, people voting on everything. You have delegated democracy, so there are like representatives, and those representatives are making decisions for you. And these are just like the common things that you see most frequently. And there's like a long tail of a million different organizational structures that have emerged out of this. And in general, though, what unifies DAOs, so DAOs are very heterogeneous in the same way that if I were to say to you, there are ocean organisms, then and somebody said, well, what's an ocean organism characterized by? You'd be like, well, some of them have tails and some of them have like little pinchers, and there's a million different body forms. But in general, they're all trying to, make decisions together. They have lots of people that are in them, and in a decentralized way, which is the D part, they're trying to take actions autonomously. Which is
the cynic in me says that there are so many versions of this in DAO land because none of them have proven to work yet. Am I wrong about that?
I think that's right. Yeah, okay. I think that's right. And which is not to say that, there are so many species of ocean critters because none of them have worked. It probably does mean that like there are certain body plans that are very effective for different problems, right? Crabs solve the problem of scavenger very well, but they're pretty bad hunters. And so my guess is that there will also be some identifiable forms of organism in the future, but there probably won't be an infinite number of them. They'll probably all run off of the same body plan. Some of them, the equivalent of a vertebrae will be invented, and then like there will be a whole class of DAOs that have a spinal cord. So maybe this is like too abstract of a way to talk about it, but that's
I was going to say this is a metaphor, but it might actually even have a physical manifestation. So maybe it's not even a metaphor.
Yeah, it is fun. In fact, something I've been playing with recently is I've been studying the timeline of organism development. So the different body parts that organisms tend to develop and in what order. And one of the things that I learned was that the nervous system developed significantly before the heart did. And maybe that makes sense. Maybe that's kind of obvious because you need a nervous system to power the heart. But it's interesting because in some sense, we as humanity right now have our nervous system in place. We have this big, electronic information ferrying system. And so as a collective, we've recently advanced to the stage of having a nervous system. And I began to wonder, what does it mean to endow our world with a heart? What does it mean to endow our economic systems with a heart? And if you think about the role of a heart is to push resources to all of the extremities of the organism, right, to the fingertips, because the organism itself knows that those fingertips are valuable. And in the absence of a heart, the only way that resources can get there is due to diffusion, right? If you think about our existing economic system, we pretty much have a economic system that runs purely off of diffusion. Unless you're capable of competing in the economic game, then you're not capable of existing unless the government is like piling some money onto your head. But then we worry about governments doing that because governments are slow and precise, and oftentimes they're capturable. And so if we really do succeed in building these alternative systems of collective intelligence, of decision-making, these alternative socioeconomic systems, maybe what it looks like is enabling us to endow the economy with a heart. That's kind of an optimistic framing.
Yeah. You also said something casually there that I think is interesting. We're talking about governance systems, socioeconomic systems, and you said collective intelligence. And the implication is that these are all sort of the same thing.
Yeah, my sense is that they're different parts. You know, the story about the blind man and the elephant, and they're each touching. You know, one is touching a leg, and they think they have a tree, and the other touching the trunk, and they think they have a snake. And it's all part of one big thing. I think that they are different facets of the underlying problem. How do we, as a group, come to believe true things? I think is what collective intelligence is about, which really means how do we change our minds about the things that we already believe?
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
In fact, like that would be one. I have I have three pillars for what I think makes for a successful system, and those are the first is you have to search for truth, like we said. This is collective intelligence. The second is you have to enable groups of people to express their preferences. And so this is what we call externality pricing, kind of in economics parlance. And then the third is we have to make sure that it's not capturable, that we make it anti-plutocratic. Plutocracy.
Meaning the system itself is not capturable.
That's right, yeah.
Okay. And you were going to say what plutocracy is, I think.
Yeah, plutocracy is when you have a small group of people that end up controlling some system. So monopoly and oligopoly and aristocracy are all examples of this broader class of captured system called plutocracy. Yeah.
Okay. So you said they have to be about searching for truth or collective intelligence. Groups need to be able to express their preferences. And then you said something from economics I don't know, so I'm going to ask you about that. And then they need to not be controllable by centralized parties, basically, right? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, the preferences thing was called externality pricing. Have you ever heard this phrase?
I'm sure I have, but I'm guessing that not everyone has, and I couldn't define it for you myself. So
great. It's my favorite. It's my favorite topic, externality pricing. It comes from externality is a term for something that is not captured from within the market. So pollution is an example of a negative externality. The health of a community is an example of a positive externality. So if everybody in your community is really healthy, then they are that's great for them, but that doesn't show up on a balance sheet anywhere, and so it's an externality. Oftentimes, there's ways in which a community being healthy is an input into like the productivity of an economy, but there's certain things which don't show up on the bottom line, and then therefore don't get priced into the market. And by priced, we just mean that a firm is paying attention to the cost at which they purchase some good or procure some service, and then the price at which they can sell it. And the difference between those two things is the profit. And so if there are things that are expensive to the environment or to the community that don't show up in that cost, then they won't be sensitive to it and they won't optimize for it. And my belief is that Milton Friedman is basically right, that the job of a company is to maximize profit, and that there have been lots of good intentioned approaches to try and get companies to care about more things, right? To make them, so like ESG was an expression of this, and like DEI was an expression of this, and B Corps, have you ever heard of a B Corp? Or stakeholder capitalism instead of shareholder capitalism. And in all cases, I think that I share their goals. I share the goals of those programs, but I think that ultimately they're destined to fail, because if ever you've run a business, when it starts running out of money, no amount of somebody saying yes, but the environment actually matters to you, because you have to pay somebody. And so we can't ask companies to do anything other than maximize profit. Instead, we have to somehow embed into the company's profitability.
Yeah, we can ask them, but we can also assume that they're not going to do what we ask, right? So it's back to your idea that selfishness has to be built into the system design.
Yeah. You can ask water to flow uphill as well.
Yeah,
and you'll be
so
equally.
the more we talk about it, the less it sounds like this is going to be possible to do. So let's hear about your optimism.
Great. Yeah. So my optimism comes from the fact that I've spent 10 years noodling on this problem. And the way that I would noodle is I would set up poker chips on my coffee table at home. And I would write down little rules for how I can move the poker chips around. And the reason that I would do that is because I had come to understand that there's this thing called Ethereum, onto which you could make new non-counterfeitable currencies. And I was really excited about that because I was like, oh, cool. You can make these new non-counterfeitable currencies and then you can move them around. And then the question was just like, can you do anything interesting with that? I don't know. And so rather than going and, building something, writing the code and whatnot and trying it out in the real world, I figured the right thing to do was just to get some poker chips and treat those as the currencies. Because of course we know that money is somehow at the bottom of this problem. So it wouldn't be surprising if playing with new games for money was also the thing that got us out of it.
So how did you intuitively know that money was at the bottom of this problem 10 years ago and so it sounds like for you heard about Ethereum, which is a cryptocurrency project, and the first thing you thought was let's figure out how this applies to governance and new socioeconomic systems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'll, without going into too long of the backstory, I was living in Ecuador prior to this. I was like 18, 19 at the time, living with a family there, and I was working in their water filter factory. And we would go to the Amazon rainforest. We'd pick up clay and we'd pick up like wood chippings, and we'd turn those into water filters, which was like a very cool experience. We got to turn Amazon dirt into clean water, and saved, who knows how many people's lives, because dysentery is a big cause of, childhood malnutrition and death. And then your malnutrition is a big input into your productivity and your health as you grow older. And so very exciting to, get to participate in this. And my job was to crush the dirt when it got into the thing. And then also my job was to operate the hydraulic press, which is this manual hydraulic press. Mm-hmm. And they would tease me because I apparently wasn't a very hard worker. I would take like 30-minute naps in the middle of the day. And I thought that was so pathetic because I was so tired because we worked so hard. And so to this day, they tease me. I was just there recently for a wedding. And of all the things they remembered about me, they remembered that I fell asleep on a pile of like dirt or something. I was like, come on.
If it makes you feel any better, if you phonetically say my name in Germany where I used to live, it means lazy.
No way. We're cut from the same cloth. That's
lazy Chad.
Yeah. Chad or Chad Fowler?
Fowler.
Fowler.
Yeah, Fowler means lazy.
That's funny. So I was working on this, and I was with these really impressive entrepreneurs, and they ended up getting, like, we bought this brand new hydraulic press, which was going to more than triple, I think, or at least double our output every day, because we just got to press a button instead of like manually cranking it. Beautiful, giant red thing, cost like $20,000, $30,000, which was sort of like a person's annual salary there. Very expensive. Mm-hmm. And we got it. And a day later, when we came back the next morning, there was a hole that was cut in the wall of the building from this big circular saw. And all we could see that was left of the hydraulic press were the furrows in the dirt as they dragged it to their truck. And apparently they sold it, and they just sold it for scraps. Like, it was just melted down and sold for scraps. Wow. And there's nothing that I was so pissed. I was like, well, aren't we going to do something about it? Like, can't we go to the police? Isn't someone going to, and they're like, they got me in a car where they could quietly tell me essentially to shut up, because it was very dangerous to get the police involved in something like this, because probably the police already played a role in it, right? So the corruption just ran so rampant. And so that was the moment in my life where I was like, okay, I understand that entrepreneurship is amazing, but entrepreneurship is only, and here are some incredible entrepreneurs. Like, they worked so much harder than I ever had in my entire life, and they did it every day. And they ran like 3 or 4 businesses as well. And nonetheless, it operated at the backdrop of this huge amount of corruption, which totally undermined their ability to be productive. And so at the time, I was learning how to use Adobe Illustrator, and I was so impressed by how Adobe Illustrator made me into a better designer. And I just began to wonder, I wonder if one day you could export being a good designer through software, or being a good being a good governor through software, in the same way that you can export being a good designer through Adobe Illustrator. What's the Adobe Illustrator for governance was like my little, 18-year-old thought. And so then when Ethereum came, I learned about Ethereum maybe 2 years later. And so, of course, that was my first thought, is like, okay, we have this new primitive. Now what can we do? Like, what games can we create?
Because it's programmable money, not just uncounterfeitable, but also programmable. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. Yeah, though it's not worth recursing into, but programmable money has never really resonated for me. I like that the money is non-counterfeitable, and I also like that we can kind of like we can sculpt incentive landscapes. But it seems to me that for some, I don't know. I haven't spent much time thinking about that particular term, but yes.
Well, sculpt incentive landscapes sounds really nice. I like that too. However, it would probably take all day to explain it to someone for programmable money.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Right. Yeah, so great question. Thanks for asking. That's how I ended up. Obsessed with the problem, and then like just thought about it on weekends and evenings, setting up my little games on my coffee table, moving the chips around. And then one day I was watching a poker final, and I watched someone. Oh, and for the most part, I didn't find anything interesting. Maybe it's something worth adding. Most mechanisms are not interesting. In fact, one of the stories I like to tell is that in this era, when I was exploring many, many, many mechanisms, one of the mechanisms that I looked at was this one where there'd be 2 tokens, and when the price of one got too high or too low, you'd use the other to either buy it up or to sell, right? And this should sound familiar because this is the Terra Luna algorithmic stablecoin structure. And for those who don't know, algorithmic stablecoins are like an attempt to create a currency whose price doesn't change, so that you can use it really easily to buy and sell. And I remember feeling really embarrassed. Like, I thought of that at this like bush on my walk, and by the time I reached the tree, I was so grateful that economists didn't have telepathy, because it was like there's this obvious way that you could exploit it, which is what ended up happening. But this is years beforehand. So long list of mechanisms that were considered in that era. Most were not interesting, or even worse, were detrimental or had obvious exploitation vectors. But then one day I was watching this poker final, and I saw one of the poker players do this riffle shuffle on their poker chips. And a riffle shuffle is where you have 2 different stacks of poker chips, and you lift them up so that like they one on top of the other stacks, and then they push them together. And I was like, well, that is an interesting mechanism, right? Because in my head, these weren't poker chips. These were, like tokens in this game that I have been playing on my coffee table for 2 years. And so that's actually where the first mechanism for us to talk about index wallets came from, was from this little riffle shuffle of poker chips. And maybe we can talk about that next.
Good. And you said index wallets, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So what is that?
So index wallets are an attempt to make it profitable to provide public goods. So typically the problem that we face in economic systems is that things that are beneficial for the group aren't necessarily beneficial for local, like the businesses that are in some locale. And what index wallets enable is for a business to now compete not only on price, and on quality, which is what we're used to with businesses, but now they can compete on values alignment with their community as well. And that they're not just competing on values alignment through good marketing, but they're actually,
or by being a B Corp.
Or by being a B corporation,
Yeah.
but that it literally is cheaper for someone to buy from a more values aligned company in an index wallets world than it is to buy from a less aligned one.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, they'll get more customers.
So now, how does that work?
Yeah. Sounds good though, right? Would be cool if this could happen. And it can. So, and the way to do it is with riffle shuffles, basically. The way to do it is the story that I'll tell is this. I like to say that I'm building index wallets because I want my dad to be able to make more bike trails. One of the things that my dad likes to do, as he's now in kind of the era of his life where he gets to give back, is he makes mountain bike trails in the Colorado region, like in the kind of like Rocky Mountains and the foothills of Denver. And of course, it's not very profitable to build these trails, even though people adore them. And so in this world where index wallets existed, it could be profitable for him to do this. Instead of him needing to go to a government and capital given to him, he could actually just set up a little treasury where people can, a treasury meaning like a place to put some funds, an account. People can donate to the creation of trails. And in exchange for donating, they're going to get some receipts of donation. And those receipts of donation are going to go into their wallet, into the payment method that they're using, kind of like their Visa card, right? Their Visa card is going to be charged up with these receipts of donation.
Okay.
And
so if you were doing this on like a normal, like an old bank, then he would set up a bank account, but there would be some software probably by which when they donate by putting money into this bank account, they're given something that looks like, I don't know,
some points,
airline miles, something like that.
Perfect.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah. And now the airline miles are available to spend as well.
That's right. And the only thing that index wallets do is they require the person who did the donation, the customer of a potential business, they require them to always pay with all of the currencies that are in their account, with all of the points that are in their account. And the analogy that I like to use for this is imagine that all of the different currencies are different colors of sand, and you were to pour them. You know, there's red sand over here in this bag, and then there's green sand over here. In the world that we exist in today, when you pay someone, you figure out what color of sand they want to be paid in. So they say, I want to be paid in US dollar sand. And so you go and you either reach into your account filled with US dollars and you take a scoop out of it and you pay them. Or if you don't have enough of the US dollar sand, then you go over to the, you take your other sand, maybe you have euros, and you take your euros and then you convert them to US dollars and then you pay them with the US dollar sand. So that's the world that we live in today. In this world, it's kind of like you take all of those different colors of sand and you put them into the same big bucket, and then you shake that bucket up. And now whenever you pay someone, you're always paying with a mixture of all of the different colors of sand at the same time.
Okay.
And so this is
dollars, euros, and mountain bike points.
And mountain bike points. Yep,
Yeah.
Exactly. And so if you think about this, so I want you to imagine that bucket of sand with all those different colors of sand that are in there. When you go and approach the local bike shop, say there's a local bike shop and a some sort of like bike chain. You know, they have a chain all the way across the United States. When you approach the local bike shop, I use this example because my family used to run a bike shop. It's very it's close to home. The local bike shop has much more reason why they care about those local trails than the national chain does. And their willingness to treat those currencies as valuable is much higher. And so they'll set what we call a valuation for those currencies. And literally, it will feel cheaper to buy from the bike shop who is valuing these bike trail tokens than it will to buy from the chain. And so the chain will begin to say, well, shoot, I guess we should increase how much we value these currencies as well, because they're competing with us on price. And so now they're also going to increase their value for this. And by doing so, they're sort of subsidizing your donation. You donated to the trail, you donated $20. You then go to the bike shop, and the bike shop values the currencies that are in your account at, let's say, 10 out of your purchase. And so now you've only paid $10, and the other 10 has been carried by the bike shop. And now the bike shop goes on to pay their vendors and to pay their employees. Well, their employees also benefit from these trails because they love to go mountain biking and whatnot. So they also value that local currency. And they're in Colorado, or they're in Denver, who is a super outdoorsy place. And so everybody else also values those currencies. And because of that, this currency keeps getting passed around, but it gets passed around with a price that's above zero. And it has a price that's above zero because everybody is benefiting from this public good, and some people are donating, and it's ending up in their account, and businesses are competing with one another to attract people who have this currency in their account.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So theoretically, then you could also buy some of this currency without donating to the initial account, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So somebody could come along and they could buy up a whole bunch of it, and maybe they then meter it out. Probably, in this story, my dad, he's probably pretty strategic as the public goods entrepreneur, how much of the currency he sells for every donation. Mm-hmm. For the initial people, he's probably giving them a lot because he wants to get this thing started. And then over time, he's probably giving less and less as the price is going up. And he's probably thinking about that quite a bit because this is how he funds the whole project. And so, yeah, you can buy this up. But I just want to point out that once the money is bundled into one of these accounts, you can never unbundle it. So you're always paying. In other words, once you've mixed up all the sand in this bucket, you can never sort out the individual different colors. Okay. Unless you have a genie and you punish the genie by telling it to do so.
So to clarify, in this case, you're saying you can never pull it out because you, Connor, are creating the system programmatically, this index wallet thing, to maybe stop talking in metaphors for a minute. It is actually a wallet like a crypto wallet, for example, that can hold tokens that are probably crypto tokens of some sort. Not because you're a crypto bro who wants to do speculative trading or flip your NFTs, but because that's the only system that enables something like this that isn't centralized and therefore controllable and therefore potentially plutocratic.
Yep.
So you've done this.
Yeah. If Visa would let me build on their platform, then I would.
Yeah. It would certainly have
they don't want to.
Easier time getting adopted en masse right now. Yeah.
That's right.
Yep. So in this case, I'm probably jumping the gun here, but what you said about you have to make a decision. Like, okay, how much money I'm going to put in this thing. I want to start using this thing because I care about causes and I want to be part of economically forcing businesses to care about the causes along with me. I might care about bike trails and music education at the same time. And so my index wallet wouldn't just have dollars and bike trail points. It would also have music education points and other similar things that express my value alignment, right?
That's right. And it would also have currencies in it that you had received because somebody else paid you. And so you'll be holding lots of currencies that you don't really value that much. And you'll be using them to pay. And sometimes they might come in handy. Like you might get a whole bunch of currency that is related to some park in Thailand. And by the time you received it, you probably didn't value it very much at all. But then you might travel to Thailand and you'll find out, to your surprise that, oh, wow, there's I have this currency that in this context is really valuable because these people here benefit from this park a whole bunch, or because I bought something from a store that was sitting right next to the park. In fact, selfishly, you might donate to the park when you're there so that you can get a better deal on the goods and services in that area while you're there, which I think as we move into an era that has lots of digital nomads and lots of mobility and agency, answering the question, how are we going to ensure that the visitors to these areas are also contributing to the maintenance of the public goods that they're benefiting from, not just the locals, then this could be a really important part of that, of answering that question.
Right. Yeah. Interestingly, I'm also realizing that, in your example, someone goes and donates to your dad's fund, and that's how they get these points. I assume your dad could also say, I will give you this many points. I will pay you using this for coming and helping me create the trails.
Exactly
right?
Yeah.
So,
or he might, maybe he's paying, in that case, I would, like, a lot of people, if they were being paid, they would never show up. As we know, economic incentives are not everything, and sometimes economic incentives crowd out other sorts of pro-social behavior.
Right, like the old story about the picking up kids late from school, so that
Yep.
the school imposes a fee, and everyone says, "Oh, great, that's only $3. I can afford that."
Exactly.
Now I don't feel bad anymore.
Or the Swiss nuclear waste story, where they went around asking people if they could put a nuclear waste burial site near their town, and almost everybody said yes. And then they came back and they said, could we pay you whatever it was, $1,000 to put it near your town? And now most people said no, because before they were kind of weighing it on, it seems like this is needed of me and kind of in my civic duty, I'd be willing to do it. But then when they're offered $1,000, they were like, is it worth it? Is it worth $1,000? Like, no.
Yeah.
So in that case, I would worry that you couldn't pay people. Yes, probably you could pay some laborers, and there are laborers that do trail maintenance work that could do that. You could also imagine, but you could definitely imagine renting equipment using something like this, where you say, hey, we'll give you a whole bunch of this token. It doesn't have value yet, but it'll have value once the trail is done being built. And then you give us this equipment, and then we'll use the equipment in order to build the trail. Great. So I'm going to wrap that up, and I'm just going to say that if anyone would like to learn about our progress on that question, index wallets, they can do so by going to this site. And on the site, we have a description of what index wallets are. We were very generously funded by Blue Yard to not only hire some of the top game theorists and mechanism designers to look at whether or not this system has the properties that we hope for. And the answer is that we found that in theory it does, but we also built a in silico simulation of an economy using index wallets. And we found that in that world as well, it was possible for index wallets to cause, through only selfish assumptions to cause people to increase their valuation of these currencies. And then we also created a game. And so this is kind of like a board game that we made that allows you to use index wallets in this little micro simulated economy in order to see how people actually behave when they're having to pay attention to what currencies do they have in their wallet, do they want to donate to a cause, and so on.
So I noticed that the URL says invalidate.indexwallets.org, and I feel like that's worth calling out because it's something that I've not seen other people do that I see you do. And I also think that maybe it's relevant to the next step in the program.
It's a great segue into the next thing. So our goal with this funding was actually to find out that index wallets did not work. And the reason that we were trying to do that is because, first of all, having built a company before, it's a lot of work to build a company. It's a huge amount of, physical labor and a huge amount of capital, but even worse, it's a huge amount of emotional labor to take an idea from small stage to big stage. And so the goal with this project was actually to find out that index wallets don't work. And explicitly, when we went and spent time with these economic modelers, and when we spent time in the simulation, we were structuring these things to have the most information gain, right? To tell us as much as they could about whether or not this was likely to work. And in the early days, there were moments where we were like, oh, actually, this doesn't work. And, kind of feeling the pit in our stomach, and me feeling the pit in my stomach of, okay, it seems like this would work. And I guess it turns out it doesn't. And having to sit with that for like sometimes days or weeks before we found out the error that we made in the code, or we figured out the error that we made in the modeling. And then when we reran it or ran the math again, we're like, oh, okay, that's why that result came through. So, and now I get to like the benefit of it. Of course, the benefit of trying to invalidate it first is now when I tell the story, I get to tell it with quite a bit of relaxation and energy, rather than defensiveness, because we've gotten to explore much of it. And so we'll have results that come out in the next couple weeks or months that summarize our findings so far.
So this is a powerful way to drive decisions, and this is what struck me when I first saw, like, you did an invalidation session or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And what I was thinking was, imagine Connor in a big company trying to do this. The incentives would be all wrong, because in big companies you're not allowed, you're not supposed to fail, and you're not supposed to prove why someone's pet project isn't going to work. People just rally around it because of the incentive systems of the typical big company. You know, all of the ones that I've been at least. Here you're doing this on your own, so you're able to do this. Why don't more people work toward invalidating their ideas so early like this?
My sense is that the background incentive of the world is one that says you need to have forward momentum. And if you talk to investors, if you talk to people within a big company, they'll always be looking for signs that things are faltering, because they don't want to be associated with the faltering thing. They want to be associated with the successful thing. And that produces this predominant, like, permission is given to the people that are going up and to the right. And so that crowds out space for curiosity. That crowds out, and this has become true for academia as well. I think this is why we have so much fraud in academia that's coming out.
I'd like to insert a word here. I think it crowds out space for searching for the truth.
Yeah.
Just to echo back your first point of what you need from a governance system, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And is a beautiful segue into the next mechanism. So with that identified, the question is, okay, we have this mechanism that seems really interesting for externality pricing, but there's nothing that prevents people from deciding to value something that's completely untrue. And so they could have a context that they operate within where they come to believe that if they sacrifice 1 million virgins, then it's going to rain, next month. And that would result in, that would probably not be good for their population. But other than that, it's the process of finding out, the process of participating in an epistemic search for what is true is wouldn't be supported by that. So in other words, I'm saying index wallets give you a way to fund public goods, but they don't give you a way to figure out what's actually good, right? Because what's actually good requires some ability to search for that. And so what we're trying to do in the second mechanism, the mechanism for collective intelligence, is we're trying to create a context where making statements about how you can find out that you're wrong gives you additional influence in the game, where we get to move from the world of where the rhetorician, the archetype of the rhetorician, the archetype of the politician is successful, to a world where the archetype of the scientist is successful. And here I mean archetype as in like, because I think most of science is actually a political game and is not a scientific game at the moment right now. Most of
You're using this word game a lot, by the way. And when you first said it just now, I thought this might be sort of foreign. So like, why are you using the word game? Is this an economic thing?
Yeah, good call out. This is game as in game theory. Yep. Hopefully also game as in fun. I think that we're moving towards an era where the future of work is play, and where people are doing things more and more as an expression of preference. I think that as with the rise of AI and with the rise of like quite a bit of additional wealth, we'll begin to also play more. But more so, I mean this in the game theoretic sense.
Okay. And as you mentioned AI, we have a question from a listener. Sheriff wants to know, do you think autonomous agents here offer a more rational network opportunity for truth?
This is such a great question. I'm so glad you asked that. Sheriff, is that what you said?
Sheriff from Index Network. Yes.
Cool. Ooh, Index Network. I see another fan of indices. So this is a great question, and I think I would actually put it back to them if I could. The thing that we're noticing is that as we develop these autonomous agents, the question of alignment is really in the air. How are we going to ensure that they behave in ways that are beneficial for the collective? And most people are trying to solve this through, what they call AI alignment. And it's a really hard field of study. I have friends. In fact, I just left a lunch with a friend who works at Google. I'm taking this call in the Google office, actually, who's working on AI alignment stuff. And it's a dark art, right? It's like nobody really knows how we're going to ensure that those systems are aligned. And even when we do, we're not going to be able to peer into them and see, why they made the choices that they made, because they're these like extremely complex systems. And so Vitalik Buterin is the creator of Ethereum, and Vitalik said, or one of the creators, and Vitalik said that there's two kinds of systems that he's interested in. He's interested in engineered mechanisms, and he's interested in kind of like economist mechanisms. And an engineered mechanism is one where you like just do it and it just so happens to work, or it tends to work. Whereas an economist mechanism is one where you very carefully consider the incentives of all of the parties, and you have some proof that shows why you like the best move that they can make also has these other properties, right? They behave in ways that are beneficial for the group or something like that, where the most profitable thing for them to do is must be, the move that you want them to make. And I'm really interested both in how do we do the engineered stuff with regards to AI, but also how do we do the economist mechanisms with regards to AI. So there's going to be a whole bunch of I think I could talk about this for a very long time, but I'm going to leave that as like my foreshortened answer. I think it's really important to also build these transparent mechanisms that AI can run on top of, where AI is like running on this incentive landscape that we're setting up for them to participate in.
Cool. I foresee a future conversation that includes Sheriff and you, and I ask all the questions that just popped into my head.
That'd be really fun. I'll bet Sheriff would have better answers than me too.
Okay, tell me about this last mechanism before we run out of time.
Okay, last mechanism is called the negation game. And so the key idea of the negation game is extremely simple. What we're trying to do is we're trying to set up a game environment where people make statements about how they can find out that they're wrong in order to get additional influence. And that's it. Now, how we do that really matters. Like all the details matter. But the key idea is just that this thing that I did in the invalidation session with index wallets, we would like to create this vast network of people doing that same thing. People who are given additional influence and resources, not for saying this is why you should fund my thing, but for instead saying this is the experiment that would allow me to find out that I shouldn't continue to pursue this work. Mm-hmm. And the way that we justify this is that the foundation of science, what makes a science, according to Karl Popper, who's a philosopher of science, is what he calls falsifiability. So Karl Popper was really obsessed with this question of what is science, and he was really annoyed by this guy called Freud, because Freud was going around and saying things like, Chad, you would like to sleep with your mother. And then Chad would say, no, I would not. He's like, you do. You have an Oedipus complex. You'd like to sleep with your mother. And you say, no, I really don't. And he say, okay, fine. You have a repressed Oedipus complex, right? No matter what you said to Freud's theory applied. And Karl Popper looked at that and he said, okay, there's something wrong about that, especially when we compare it to someone like Einstein. Einstein comes along and says, okay, general relativity, here's the exact equation. If there's ever, if ever you see any deviation from this exact equation, then my theory is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And, what that meant was that in the middle of a solar eclipse in 1919 in Argentina, you should have been able to train a telescope at the sky and see a star that was a little bit out of place. And that star should have been out of place by exactly this amount, at exactly this time, and you should have been able to capture it with a camera. And if that star had been out of place, then the whole theory of general relativity, Einstein says, would be wrong. Mm. And nonetheless, somebody goes there, Arthur Eddington goes there in 1919, he takes the picture, and sure enough, the star was exactly where Einstein's theory would have predicted it. So Karl Popper says, okay, that is science. And what Freud was doing, that is not science. And it's the same thing that we're trying to do here. We're trying to enable someone to play this game where if it was Einstein saying, this is my theory of general relativity, if you see any of these things, I would be wrong, then that should give Einstein all of this additional influence in the game.
Okay, so for me, I'm getting this, but it's now way too abstract. So, and I don't mean that what you've said is too abstract, but more like I have this desire now to figure out, what does this really mean? What is the use case? How does it manifest? And what sorts of decisions or facts are we looking to get out of a system like this?
Yeah. So I feel some sense that actually talking about how the mechanism works would be worth our time here. Just to give people the details of the mechanism so they can think about it on their own. And if this kind of like slides off the wall, then that's okay. But I think that there's some people who might be listening who would find the details really interesting. And I think they're also accessible. So what I want you to imagine, in fact, I'm just gonna share my screen if that's okay.
Yes.
And I'm gonna draw it.
Assuming your operating system allows you to do that. It does.
Oh, look, we made a infinite loop.
Great.
Okay, so actually, I think I have an example over here that I'm gonna steal. Or do you want to give a example proposal?
I do not. I want you to do it.
Okay. Okay, so I want you to imagine that there's a researcher who's interested in Alzheimer's, and that this researcher would like to use C. elegans, which is a type of flatworm, to further study Alzheimer's. And of course, they'd like to get some funding to continue their research. In the typical world, they would go and write up a brief that says, here's the reasons why you should fund research into C. elegans. And instead, the world that I want you to imagine is a world where they're gonna stake on this. They're actually gonna bet a little bit of money that says this is a thing that's worth doing. But they're also going to say, here are some ways in which I could change my mind. So let me go and grab these little things over here and make some statements about how they could change my mind. And the two arguments that they're making for how they could change their mind are that, these are things that I actually took from papers, but, these tools show limited success. And another one would be something like many mammalian features do not exist in this flatworm, right? Both of these are actually true. And they would say something like, okay, if this were true, actually, I think this one was false and this one is actually true. But if this were true, then I would change my mind. And how much would they change my mind? Let's say that if this were true, they would change it 100%. And if this was true, they would change it 90%. And I'm kind of using a simplified version of the mechanism here, just because I want to get the story across.
Right. So I'm the researcher. I have this assertion, that I want to test. I'm going to put $10 of my own money against it as sort of like a bet.
Yep.
But then I'm saying, if you can tell me this first point is true, I forfeit my $10 and I stop working on this altogether.
That's right.
If the second one is true, I forfeit $9 and I still have 10 and I continue on the search.
If if this one was true, you would forfeit $9 and you'd only have $1 left.
Right.
So these are this is like putting this at risk. And in traditional financial markets, having a certain amount of money and then using that money as collateral in order to get additional influence is called leverage. It's called financial leverage. But here, because we have a certain amount of money and we're putting at risk because we believe that something is true, rather than calling it financial leverage, this is epistemic leverage. Epistemic leverage. And epistemics is all about what's true. And so that's what this mechanism is called, is epistemic leverage. And so in this case, there'd be some score that's associated with this point, and that score is going to dictate how much funding is allocated for this project. And for simplicity, let's just say that they started with 10 because they staked 10. They then used epistemic leverage to get another 10, and they also used epistemic leverage to get another 9. And so now, whereas they started with only $10 that they staked into this, they got a score of 29, which is going to be compared to the other scores of the other things in the system, and then money is going to be allocated to them in exchange for this. Now,
so this is regardless of whether these 2 points below are true or false.
It's not. I'm telling a much simplified story. Okay. In fact, the more that this is believed by the system, the more epistemic leverage they're going to get, because for some technical reasons, you want to give the most influence to the most surprising statement. And it would be really surprising for someone who believes in this to say that something that's believed by everybody would change their mind. Because if it's already believed by everybody, why hasn't it already changed your mind, right? And then the other thing is, you don't just want a surprising signal, but you want it to come from a trusted source. And so this gets us to the end of epistemic leverage. The final mechanism that's a part of epistemic leverage is that imagine, Chad, that I was the one that came along and made this stake, and then I also made this restake, right? I used this epistemic leverage here. And so Connor has come along and done this. Here's Connor in both cases. But let's say that you happen to know that I run a flatworm C. elegans breeding company, right? Well, then you know that probably I'm not going to change my mind. I'm probably just doing this because I want the Alzheimer's researchers to have more C. elegans funding, right? So they can buy stuff from me. Back to that Philip Morris story. So what you can do is you can come along and take a move called doubting. And when you doubt, so Chad is doubting. Let's have you doubt another $10. When you come along and doubt, that's going to reduce my bonus influence up here. And for simplicity, we'll just make this all linear. So you got plus 10, and now Chad doubts 10, and that takes away 10 from Connor. And so now, Chad, you're getting paid in some percentage yield on this doubt. You're getting paid, like maybe let's say 5%. I don't know. What do you want? 5% a year, 10% a year in exchange for taking this doubt. But then if I ever do change my mind, so I change my mind, I slash myself, this money gets lost. It goes into the system. Then that's the moment when you also get slashed as well. And so you can see the incentive that this is creating in the system. All of a sudden, you're looking around for the people that you think are saying that they will change their mind, but they're not actually going to change their mind. And if you find them, you're going to go and you're going to doubt them. And that's going to reduce their influence in the game. And who does that leave? Well, that only leaves those people. The only people that are not going to be doubted are those people that people think are actually going to change their mind. And so now we've created this emergent incentive for people to be known as the kinds of people that change their mind, because the more that they're known as someone that changes their mind as a result of new information, the more influence they will tend to have in the system.
Right. So coming into the system from scratch, you could even be someone who owns such a farm. Everyone doubts you. Turns out that you then prove to be someone who will change his or her mind.
Mm-hmm.
And then over time, because this is a programmatic system and a network, people could inspect that and learn about it, learn about you and your propensity to change your mind in a system where it is very difficult to rig because there are all these financial incentives at play, right? So it would be not in your interest to rig the system. Yeah.
That's exactly right. You got it. So that is epistemic leverage. And this sits inside of a larger stack of mechanisms. I'm not going to go into it right now. For those of you that are interested, not only you'll notice that this tends to push people towards more resolvable statements, because a more resolvable statement is less likely to be doubted because you're more likely to change your mind.
Mm-hmm.
And as you get closer to more and more resolvable statements, at the very bottom, kind of at the leaves of that tree, you can play this game that's called a Schelling point game or a consensus mechanism, which basically is like, will everybody also agree that this is the thing that we saw, is the thing that you do at the very edge of this system. So anyway, I just wanted to raise that because some people then wonder how epistemic leverage fits into a bigger system. And what you should be imagining is this kind of massive market for ideas, where as the idea becomes more and more believed by the system, the price that's associated with that token goes up. And so you're now able to bet not just on companies that are associated with certain ideas, but actually you're able to bet on the ideas themselves.
Interesting. And a sort of subtle point that you made is that the statements that would cause you to change your mind are, through the mechanism and the incentives in the system, polished to be more useful. So, even at that level, incentive mechanisms drive quality in the process, which is a really fascinating thing.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And so, I'm feeling like a little incongruity, which is because you said earlier, I'm not just a crypto person that's trying to sell my NFTs. And that's true. But then I just said, okay, now this allows you to bet on ideas. So how do those two things fit together? And the answer that I want to give, which I think is a great way to kind of close up our session here, is that in order for us to do science at scale in a world where money gets its way, in a highly financialized, highly adversarial world, we have to somehow create ways for the existing games of economics to talk to the games of epistemics, right? To talk to our systems of sense making. And so the reason that I think that it's actually important that you can bet on ideas is so that money is capable of understanding, is capable of being sensitive to evidence, is capable of being sensitive to internal consistency and epistemic humility. And so this allows a way in. I think one of the reasons that we most fear money's role in science is because the games, back to that term, the games of money tend not to be sensitive to evidence. And now if we create a game that permits both money and evidence to exist simultaneously, then maybe we also get to create a new type of economic system on top of that.
Amazing. And sort of wrapping up the concrete manifestation of this, this negation game is a system that you are building that is ideally untamperable, at least designed to be untamperable.
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying things that may not be true. These are assertions. You can tell me that I'm wrong.
We would like it to be untamperable.
And it will embody and codify all this stuff we were just talking about, so that it could be used for any group to make any sort of decision, including the obvious, like how do decentralized autonomous organizations make decisions about what to do with their treasuries, which is the primary way that they accomplish anything, since they are discords with wallets attached to them, says the old joke. But it could also be the governance system for Mars.
Yeah, let's not get over our skis a little too far. I think it's great to have big ambitions and big goals to chase down, and optimistic futures. And then, of course, in the short term, be very negative about what is likely. This is in general my life philosophy. Be a negative optimist, optimistic about what's possible and negative about what's likely. And so in the short term, we'll actually be building this and we'll be deploying it to DAOs. I don't know how publicly I'm allowed to talk yet about who we're going to be working with, but some of these notable DAOs that have large treasuries that they'd like to allocate capital within. And so we'll be learning in that context what parts of this work and what parts don't. And then afterwards, what we'd love to be able to do is to live in a world where, for example, somebody says UBI is a great mechanism of a great method of addressing wealth inequality and increasing people's quality of life, and that can be a point in the system, and groups of people can coordinate and autonomously make sense of the ways in which that's true. Because the thing about UBI is that it may work in certain contexts. And so we're not going to get this blanket answer. Instead, we're going to get an answer which is like, it works right here. And so let's create a context where we can go and explore that. And I imagine that there are myriad ideas that are not being explored, probably just in the minds of listeners, where they think of that kind of like almost conspiracy theory that they have, which is like, I think that this is the case, right? I think that, one of mine was, had something to do with quantum mechanics and polarization. And so I was like, I think that there's this thing that's going on. And I want to go and explore that. And I want to do that with a whole bunch of other people where we're running these experiments and so on. And so my hope is that this gets to be a massively parallel scientific sense-making system that we use into the future. And the term that we're using for this kind of capital, it's the kind of capital that comes before venture capital. You're not making a product that you take to scale, but instead you're taking an idea and you're trying to kind of upregulate its plausibility or learn about how plausible it is. We call this epistemic capital, the thing that comes before the capital of ideas. So that's the future that I believe in.
Well, I believe in it too. You've made me an optimist.
Amazing. I'm
so
excited.
What do you want people to do next?
So if people would like to get involved, we're doing all of our work open source. They can come and contribute to our GitHub. And that is github.com/networkgoodsinstitute. And they can also join a Telegram, which I just created literally at this very moment. And so I'll also drop that link to you right now.
All right.
Let's see.
I'll post it on the comments of the YouTube video.
Okay, great. I actually don't know how to make a Telegram group, it would seem.
Then we will post it afterward.
Oh, here we go. It's perfect.
Oh, you did it. You did it. Great.
Cool.
Yeah, I'll put it in the comments here because no one's going to read this off the screen. So go to the YouTube video, look in the comments, and you shall see the Telegram link.
Amazing. Anything else that you think should be said before we sign off?
I think what should be said will be said in the next session.
Great. This was fun. Thanks so much for hosting it.
Yes. Thank you. Lots of fun.
All right.